Today we're working on section 1.7, properties. So all these properties, I think we dealt with all of them last year. So now we're just kind of taking them to the next level. So you'll see these properties throughout your school and career. I'm sure you saw these in younger grades too, but definitely in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade you're going to be dealing with these properties. But let's just take a second and let's go over the properties that are listed here. There's the commutative property, which just means you're going to rearrange the order of things. And there's commutative property of addition and multiplication. So 6 plus -3 is equal to -3 plus 6. You can rearrange that and you get the same answer. 2 plus 5 is equal to 5 plus 2. Or 4 times 5 is equal to 5 times 4. -2 times -3 is equal to -3 times -2. So you can just rearrange those numbers and you get the same answer. Notice it is only for addition and multiplication. Subtraction, division would give you different answers. Then there's the associative property of addition and multiplication. Notice again, addition, multiplication, not subtraction, not division. But that just means that we can associate, we can put parentheses or grouping symbols in without changing anything. So -6 plus 5 plus 3, if we put the parentheses in the front or we put the parentheses in the back, we get the same answer. So you can rearrange those wherever you'd like. Then there's the identity property of addition, and that's also true for multiplication, sorry. You can move those grouping symbols around and you'll be okay. Then there's the identity property of addition. So anything plus 0 is going to be itself. So 5 plus 0 is 5, 10 plus 0 is 10, 0 plus 11 is 11. And then identity property of multiplication, you multiply by 1 and you get the same answer. So anytime you have the identity property, it's like whatever you start with is what you're ending up with. The number doesn't change, right? So add in 0, multiplying by 1, you still end up with the same number. The inverse property of addition says anything plus the opposite of itself is equal to 0. So -10 plus 10 is 0. 3 plus -3 is 0. 5 plus -5 is 0. And then the zero property of multiplication, anything times 0 is 0. 5 times 0 is 0. 12 times 0 is 0. 0 times 1,000,000 is 0. When you multiply by 0, you get 0. So you'll notice some patterns here. Look, addition, 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 right? Multiplication, multiplication. So none of these are division, none of these are subtraction. There's a good reason for that. We're not going to worry about it for the moment. And then the last one is the distributive property of multiplication over addition. So again, it's addition. And the distributive property of multiplication over subtraction. This is where you can take some numbers and you can put parentheses by them to simplify them. So for instance, 2 times -4 plus 7 is the same as 2 times -4 and 2 times 7. So it doesn't matter if you break up the 4 and the 7 or put them back together, you still get the same answer. And then distributive property of multiplication over subtraction, same thing. If you got 5 times 9 in parentheses, 3 times parentheses 5 minus 9 is the same as 3 times 5 minus 3 times 9. All we're doing in this chapter is just working on identifying these properties and then also using them to solve problems. So the whole reason we learn these properties is it just makes the math a lot faster. So believe it or not, like if we have a problem like 4 times 5 times 1,000 times 33 times 1 times 0, and you know that the identity property of multiplication says, the zero property of multiplication says anytime you multiply by 0, you get 0. I don't have to multiply 4 times 5 times 1,000 times 33 times 1 times 0. I know that if I'm multiplying by 0 at some point, the answer is going to be 0. So I can save a lot of time if I just know this property. Or similarly, if you ask me to, let's see, what's a good example? If you're like, what is 5 times 45 plus 5 times 55, okay? 5 times 45 plus 5 times 55. That's a difficult problem for me to do in my head. I'd have to write this one out. However, using the distributive property of multiplication over addition, I could change this to be 5 times 45 plus 55, and then that's an easy problem, right? 5 times 100 is 45 times 55 is 100. So my answer is 500. So if I know these properties, this problem becomes really simple. Okay, down on the bottom we've got some samples. Notice the language here is just like out of the textbook. So these are problems you have to do for today. First thing says name the property used. So I'm just looking at this -5 times 0 equals 0 and trying to figure out where does it come from up here. So a couple things to look for. -5 times 0 equals 0. We're doing multiplication, right? So I'm over on this side. These ones here are all multiplication. So it's going to be one of these properties over on this side. And then I see an equals to 0 right here. Well, which of these properties are equal to 0? Looks like right here. 0 property of multiplication says anything times 0 is equal to 0. Negative 5 times 0 is 0. That's definitely the identity, or the 0 property of multiplication. All right, so underneath here, we're just going to write 0 prop. I'm just going to shorten it up. 0 prop of multiplication. I don't have room to write it all out there. Try to scrunch it all on one page so I don't have to scroll up and down. So 0 property of multiplication on this first one. Next up, negative 7 times negative 3 equals negative 3 times negative 7. Again, this is a multiplication problem. So now I'm looking at this part of the chart over here, multiplication. And then it looks like the 7 and the 3, or the negative 7 and negative 3 get reversed, right? 7 comes first here, it comes last there. 3 is second, now it comes first. So we're switching. So I'm looking up here, where do I switch? We're dealing with multiplication, where do I flop those two numbers? And right here is the commutative property of multiplication, says you can flop those two numbers and you get the same answer. So this one is going to be the commutative property. Commutative property of multiplication. Right, commutative property of multiplication. And then the last one here, negative 4 times 2 minus 3 in parentheses equals negative 4 times 4 minus negative 4 times 3. You know what? That one is not going to be in any one of our notes here. I screwed up. This 4 should actually be a 2. I made a mistake there. Where that has a 4 there, make sure you put a 2. So it's equals parentheses negative 4 times 2 parentheses minus negative 4 plus times 3. All right, so I should have put a 2 there. I apologize. If you put that 2 there, now you can see we've got 2 minus 3, and now the 2 minus 3 got broken apart, right? So we distributed, hopefully remember this from last year, that negative 4 got distributed. Negative 4 times 2, because I changed that to a 2, and negative 4 times 3 right there. And there's a minus in between there. Now, there's a minus in between the two, which tells me it's the distributive property of multiplication over subtraction, because I've got that minus sign there, right? I've got subtraction there. So this is the distributive property of multiplication over subtraction. All right, distributive property of multiplication over subtraction. All right, down below that, I'm just going to erase these because it's getting a little bit, going to be a lot of writing on the board. Erase these. Next one says, name the property used, that's what we just did up here, and find the missing integer. And they use a question mark for the integer. So 6 plus 0, let's find the answer first. 6 plus 0 is equal to 6, right? So my answer here is 6. What property is that? Well, it's got to be addition because I've got a plus sign there, so I'm looking over on this one. And I'm adding 0 to a number. So where do I see add in 0? Identity property of addition. So this is the identity property. So I know it's hard for you to read. Identity property of addition. All right, again, it's hard to read. Identity property of addition. I'm working on getting a better smart board. All right, next up, and that says that anytime you add 0, you end up with 0. So identity property of addition. Next up, this is a lot to look at. Like 3 times parentheses, 3 times parentheses, negative 5 parentheses, parentheses times 2. To make this a little bit easier, let's use a letter instead of a number. I think that'll make it easier. So really what I have here is A times B. I'm going to use A for 3 and B for negative 5 times C equals 3 was A times B times C. A times B times C equals A times B times C. But then the one thing that changes is over here the 3 and the negative 5, the A and the B are in parentheses. And then over on this side, the B and the C are in parentheses. So do you see what happened is the only thing that changed is we moved the parentheses. It used to be on A and B, now it's on B and C. So the parentheses switch from 3 and negative 5 to negative 5 and 2. So we just moved those parentheses. Again, we're dealing with multiplication, so we're on this side of the table on the top, and we're just moving parentheses. That's going to be our associative property. And I remember saying this to sixth grade, is that who do I associate with? It's like, who do I hang out with, right? And up, or let's look down here. Down here, the 3 and the 5 are associated. 5's like, hey, I'm going to hang out with 3. But then it switches. The -5 now got rid of the 3, and it's associated with the 2. So we're switching who the 5 associates with, or the -5, who they associate with. So this is the associative property of multiplication, because we're dealing with multiplication. Associative property of multiplication. Next up, 4 plus blank equals 0. Well, that's just like the first one. I guess I used the same one twice. 4 plus 0 equals 0. 4 plus 0. Oh no, I got that wrong. What can we add to 4 to make 0? If we want to do it algebraically, we say, hey, we got to subtract 4 from both sides, and we get the question mark equals -4, right? So you can do a little bit of algebra there. But if we want to save time on the algebra, this one I don't have a missing integer on either. I screwed that one up kind of badly. Anyway, over here, the missing integer is -4. 4 plus -4 is equal to 0. And then I need to know the property. Well, I'm dealing with addition because I've got a plus sign there, so it's addition on this side. And I'm taking two numbers. I'm taking a number and its opposite, they're added up to 0. So a number plus its opposite is 0. That's the inverse property of addition. Any number plus its opposite is equal to 0. So that's inverse property of addition. Inverse property of addition on that one. That says inverse property of addition, or improp of addition. Okay, last but not least, this is where it really gets useful to know these properties, is we are going to compute it mentally, and then we're going to name the property used. So 0 times -6. Anytime you multiply by 0, you get 0. So this one is 0. And then if I look at my properties up here, we're dealing with multiplication. We're getting 0 for an answer. So these are all multiplication. Where am I getting 0 for an answer? That's that 0 property of multiplication again. So write that on your paper. 0 property of multiplication. I don't have room to write this here. That somehow says 0 property of multiplication, okay? So the answer for this one is 0, and that's the 0 property of multiplication. Next up, we've got 5 times -4 plus 5 plus 4. All right, that's a lot going on in that one. I'm going to scroll down a little bit so I can write it down here. 5 times -4 plus 5 plus 4. All right, to solve this one mentally, I could do the math and say 5 times -4 is -20, 5 times 4 is 20, 20 plus -20 is 0. But I also know some rules that can make this a little bit easier for me. I'm going to change this problem since I have 5. Oh man, I screwed this one up too. This is supposed to be a multiplication symbol between the 5 and the 4 over here. So sorry, this should be 5 times -4 in parentheses plus 5 times 4. So you got to change that to a multiplication or this one doesn't make sense. So I apologize about that. I'll try to correct it in the notes. So this one's going to be 5 times -4. I'm going to change this to 5 times -4 plus 4. So I can use the distributive property here in reverse. So 5 times -4 plus 5 times 4 is really the same as 5 times -4 plus 4, which is 5 times 0, and 5 times 0 is 0. So I used two properties to solve this one. I used the distributive property to say, hey, I can take the 4's out of this, put them in parentheses. So that was the distributive property of multiplication over addition. I know I'm writing it poorly, but you should on your paper write distributive property of multiplication over addition. And then I also used the the 0 property of multiplication for this one. 0 property of multiplication. Because anytime you multiply times 0, you get 0. 0 property of multiplication. All right, and last but not least, -947 times 1. I can do that one in my head super easy. Anytime you multiply by 1, you get the same answer. So the answer is -947. We're dealing with multiplication, and we end up with the same number, so the identity of the number didn't change. So this is the identity property of multiplication. just says anytime you multiply by 1, you end up with that same number. So the identity of that number doesn't change when you multiply by 1. All right, the only way to get good at this is to practice. Try these out. Let me know if you need any help.